Oftentimes in my class, I would be the only female, and I would be the only black person. And I remember very vividly in one of my classes, someone told me that I should consider myself part white.
What?
Because I was being educated in a higher institution. And yeah, that was my reaction for a minute too.
I pulled a couple of student reviews from during my research on
That's
you.
not fair, Laura. Stop it.
So you're a professor at USC's School of Business, Marshall.
Yes.
Yes. So one of the reviews says, Dr. Little is a great teacher and a caring person. Her essays are actually useful in your life and not just a bunch of boring case studies. Highly recommend. That was about, like, every single review was just raving. Everybody loves you. The words that appear at the top, they have like keywords.
Yes.
We're all caring, inspirational, respected, hilarious, gives good feedback. Those were on each of the reviews. Those were the keywords.
Thank you.
I mean, that just says so much about you.
Challenge will come with your journey, and you'll get beyond that. And that's why I love education, because it gives you opportunities to reimagine yourself.
Right.
You can make mistakes, but you can always come back. And so I finished that. I got my master's degree and was invited to go and teach in Arizona for a couple of years, which was culturally, again, very different. And being an only child and moving away was quite difficult.
Right. So now you're without your mom.
I'm without my mom for the first time in my life.
Wow.
Yes.
So it was a culture shock, and then you were also apart from the person that had really been, you know, your rock. How old are you now when you go there?
I am 25.
Okay.
25 years old, and I'm teaching again at a Research 1 university. I'm the only black female in the department, which was the first foray into being the only in higher education in many settings. What was challenging is that I would have students come in the classroom and say, do you know when the professor is coming? And I would say, yes, just have a seat. I do know when the professor is coming.
Yes.
But it really was an assault in many ways on my intellect and on who I was and what I was trying to bring to students. But it also taught me that there were equally as many students who valued what I had to bring.
Yes.
So after 2 years there, I decided to go back and get my PhD because I was working very hard. And so I went to Bloomington, Indiana. So I left LA, went to Arizona, drastically different, and then Bloomington, Indiana, which was another big transition.
That's a huge transition.
Yes, much further away.
How'd you like it there?
It was conducive for graduate school, and it was challenging. I actually lost my father the spring of my first year. And if I go back a little bit to Arizona, you know, being an only child and growing up, there were some challenges. My father was always very close, but there were still challenges that I wanted to navigate that I hadn't really addressed about just being present in different ways. So financially, that wasn't the issue so much, but present in the sense of how are you going to guide me? And he was older than my mother, and so there were some things that I needed to work out.
They were never married, or they were? They were never, and were they ever together?
They were together.
I mean, they were obviously together at some point, but were they together?
Yes,
together?
They were in a relationship,
Okay.
but they were never married.
All right.
And so my
But
mother.
he stayed close to you.
Yeah, he stayed in the area, and yes, he would come to my events and obviously support my mother in that way and be there for holidays, but it was still quite different. And because of that challenge, I had never really addressed that. And so when I was in Arizona, it began to seep out, the way in which I was trying to navigate and figure out. And so I finally wrote him a letter and said, some of these things just didn't make sense as I got older about choices that you could have made, right?
Yeah.
And my mother had moved on by then, but just thinking about it in hindsight. And so, you know, when he passed, thankfully, we were in a very great place, but it was quite difficult for me. And I was contemplating coming back home. I was like, why am I here so far away? But I persisted. And I know that he and my mom, because I was first generation. And of the 15 of my mom's siblings, only a few of us actually went to college. And it was important for me to persist because I knew that the experience I had in Bloomington was interesting because it was a little bit different.
Yeah. How so?
Well, I was pursuing my PhD, and my cohort, or my class, there were 17 of us, 14 white males, 2 white females, and myself. And I found out a little bit later that I was the first black female admitted in 10 years.
Ooh.
And, you know, I could have responded one of 2 ways. I could have been like, look at how exceptional and how wonderful I am. Or I know that I was not the only smart black girl who had applied. And I knew that for sure because one of my friends had also applied. But it was the #1 program in the country. And as I shared, I had taught for 2 years at a Research One university, but I began to question, why is this the case? Because while my peers were, you know, great peers, it was not exceptional in that sense. And oftentimes in my class, I would be the only female, and I would be the only black person. And I remember very vividly in one of my classes, someone told me that I should consider myself part white.
What?
Because I was being educated in a higher institution. And yeah, that was my reaction for a minute too. But it was a serious 2-hour conversation where I had to really explain why that assumption was just so insidious and so painful, because I asked in a reaction, so are you part black? Because I'm in this space with you. And they were like, well, of course not. You know, you're being educated in this style. And so what I took from that one experience, because the week later many of my peers sent me an email, and I wrote an article called Embrowning the Ivory Tower, talking about what my actual presence in the space meant. And again, as I said, being in Arizona and being the only black female faculty and relatively young, and then going here and it started a path of kind of a dual sense of, thankfully, I'm in this space. My voice is in this space, because without it, who would interrogate those thoughts?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you know, I didn't cry those 2 hours, but when I left, I cried about 5 hours. I was just weeping. And it's a weight, as you were sharing as moms. It's a weight.
Yeah. Was the assumption of the person you had the conversation with that it was a compliment to you?
Yes. We had read an article, and they had asked Cornel West if he thought he should consider himself in terms of identity part white because he had gone to Ivy League institutions, and that was the impetus for the conversation. And so it was somewhat as a compliment, like, yeah, you know, you have made it, Sharoni. You're smart enough. You're here with us. So take that as a badge of honor. And of course, it was an affront to me and an affront to everyone around the legacy of those who could not pursue education. The elderly black women at my church, when I said I was going to become a doctor, and they were asking me what kind of practice. Well, what you gonna help us with, baby? And I was like, not so much.
Not that kind of doctor.
Not that kind.
But you were pre-med at one point.
Yes, so. I could put on a Band-Aid, Laura.
Are you pregnant now, or you get pregnant soon after that? Do you get pregnant there in
my last semester
in Bloomington?
In Bloomington.
In
Bloomington. And so I was finishing up grad school and got pregnant. And believe it or not, at 32, it was one of the most difficult things to tell my mom. And
you called her?
I was actually here on break in December, about to go back.
So wait, take me back just a little bit. You found out you were pregnant. You were not in a relationship with the dad, is that?
I was in the relationship, and I was away at school. So I came home for break, and I was home for break. You're still trying to get me into some trouble here. So I was home for break, and we rekindled.
Be careful. Yeah, it's just night.
we rekindled, and as a result, my beautiful babies were conceived.
Yes. And they are beautiful.
Yes.
We'll talk about them soon.
And what's so interesting is that I was actually had a doctor's appointment to check on fertility because I was like, oh, I'm going to be done with school this year. Hopefully, I'll get a mate and we'll be getting together. I want to make sure when I'm ready to start having children. Yeah. And I went in, and they would always do these pregnancy tests.
Of course,
and
every
so
time.
I was like, what's taking so long? What's going on? And they were like, step over here. And I was like, yes. And they were like, you're pregnant. And I was like, stop. And literally the waterworks began to come because, my mother, she was a single mother. Her mother had been a single mother at times. And our faith, it was, even though I was 32, I was fearful because I did not want to shame my mom. And so that was where the pain was and the uncertainty, but I knew the love was there. And so, believe it or not, I went and made these personalized Hallmark cards, and I went to her house, and I was crying for 2 hours and couldn't speak, and she was like, what is it? She went through this laundry list. Finally, I just threw the card to her and said, who's going to be your grandmother? That's how I told her.
What did she say?
She took a big breath, and then she was like, it's going to be okay, and started talking about things. But it was always funny because she would always tell me, now don't you do anything growing up because you'll be the one to have twins. And I used to pray for twins. I used to say, I want to have twin boys. And so I went back to Indiana because like literally I was leaving the next day. And so I'm all frantic. I went back to Indiana, and about 5 weeks in, because I was at that time considered a little bit older, they did an ultrasound. And in Indiana, I'm by myself out there, and about 30 minutes, and the lady just said, matter of fact, oh, it's taking a little bit of time because I'm trying to see baby 2. And I started screaming. I said, you're trying to see what? So I passed out, believe it or not. And they're trying to wake me up, and they were like, man, we're going to have to leave you here for about an hour. And that's how I found out I was having twins. I called my mom, and literally as soon as she said hello, I just wept, and she guessed by my reaction, but shortly after she did. She was like, what's wrong? And then she just blurted out, are you having twins? So I think she felt it.
Mom's is on top of it.
She was on top of it. And then I got happy after she wasn't, too upset.
Right,
yes.
right. So I'm going to fast forward you just a little bit because among the many, if you look Sharoni Little up on social media, you'll see several YouTube videos of her, and one is a TEDx talk, and you're amazing in this talk. But you tell this story called Corrective Lenses. Is that the name of it? Mm-hmm. Would you mind just telling us a condensed version of that story, because it's so beautiful?
Sure. Well, I was happy to share with Pasadena women, and as I tried to think about what I can share from a research perspective, it kept coming back to me about my story as a mom. And when my boys, as I told you, I left Indiana, I was pregnant, I did not touch my dissertation for 5 years because I was at home with them for the first year, which I vaguely remember because it was bottles and diapers and bottles and breastfeeding 2 babies at one time. Ooh. And then I started working when they were 11 months old at USC. And so those 5 years just went by and it was a blur. And so when they sent me a letter saying, you have 1 year to finish this degree or you give it up. And because of my experiences, because of being the first black female in 10 years, and because of all of that, I was not going to leave my degree in Bloomington.
Right.
So as a working mom, my mom happened to be out of town, and they were like, we have to have a draft by this day or we cannot schedule it. So I said, I will go in. I did not have a sitter. I was going in on a Saturday to my office. My boys were about 5. And I took in Cheez-Its, Barney tape, everything. I said, I'll go in for a couple of hours. And so we went to my office, and my office is on the 4th floor, and there is no elevator. It's an old building. And so I went in, and about 3 or 4 hours in, I'm realizing I'm not even near finished. So I called their father, and I said, can you please come and get the boys? Imagine now, 5-year-old boys in a little office on a Saturday. I've done everything I know to do, and I'm trying to write and type and all of this. And so I said, please come and get the boys for me. I'm trying to do this. I have no one else. Mom is out of town. So he came and got them, and I'm starting, I'm writing, I'm thinking I have a 3 or 4 hour window, and 45 minutes later I get a call. Okay, where do you want me to drop them off?
Oh, no.
And I'm like, excuse me? And he was like, where do you want me to drop them off? And so I said, okay, just bring them back to my office. And he brought them with their car seats up the 4 flights and dropped them off. And so I'm sitting there, he fed them and brought them back to me. And I'm sitting there, and long story short, nearly midnight is when I actually was wrapping up. So they had been asleep 2 or 3 times. They had run to the restroom. I had gone to get food, coming back. And as we were walking down the stairs, I had 2 car seats in my hand. I had their baby bag still, their bag with everything. The dissertation draft, and 2 little boys walking in front of me down 4 flights of stairs. I had scissors in my pocket because we were parked on a main street and it was dark and I was by myself.
Yeah.
So we walk, and I'm crying the whole time behind them. And we finally get to the car. We get home. I stop at Taco Bell and get some burritos, throw them in the shower, and then put them in the bed with me. And I just cried myself to sleep because I felt so horrible that they had been there all day, but I had no other choice.
Right.
You remember when you kept us in your office all day? I would instantly tear up.
Yeah.
Instantly, because I felt so bad. But then one day they were laughing and they were like, we have fun. And so that was what I shared in the TEDx, that what I had been looking at as a negative, as a deficit, as I was not the best mom, I realized as soon as they made clear their vantage point that I was actually modeling for them not only my commitment to what I had begun before them, but really for them, the legacy that I was trying to leave for them. And I had no other options. And I was pushing myself because they were at the forefront of my motivation. And when I realized that, I was like, please stop being so hard on yourself, because I really, again, being a single mother, and I'm not certain if you've ever experienced this, I never wanted them to be stigmatized.
Oh, yes.
I did not want people to say, oh, I born and raised in Compton, I raised them in Compton, and the stigma that, stereotypes and media narratives.
Yes.
Single mom, 2 boys from Compton, and what that narrative could go, where it could go and what it could say. And so I just didn't never want to hurt them.
Yeah.
And that's where the pain came from. But thankfully, they were smarter than their mommy.
Well, I love you said it's like when you go to the optometrist and they show you the different lenses and you find the clear one, and it became clear for you at that moment.
Very clear.
That you were looking at it in a way that was, like you said, at a deficit.
Yeah, I had to put on those corrective lenses. And the challenge a lot of times for moms, and I'm sure all parents, is to keep the corrective lens on.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned Compton, because do you still live there?
I still do.
So, and that's one of the other things I love about you, is how proud you are of where you live, and also how you have run for office there. Do you want to just talk a little bit about why Compton, why it's important to you, and then what you're doing there?
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we kind of think about where we grow up and have our fond memories and we move on. And of course you want those choices. But for me, Compton represented a lot. It was where my grandfather first settled. It was one of the few cities that you saw a lot of African Americans back in the late 50s and early 60s moved to, primarily Watts. And Compton was an area that was redlined, where black people were not allowed to even purchase homes. And my grandfather, he was the only second African American to purchase on that street. And that's where my mom moved, and that's where I was raised. I lived with my grandfather for a while, and then we lived on our own. But for me, it was a community of families. It was a community of working people. It had instilled a lot in me. And if you look at the legacy of Compton, a lot of great people across industries have come from there. And part of it is the challenge, part of it is the resiliency, but that's not the full story. So for me, Compton represented church and friends and education, because I attended Compton High School, I attended Compton Community College. It laid a foundation for me to begin college at 16. That's not the common narrative.
Right.
And so when I made the choice to raise the boys here in California, I wanted to raise them there because I wanted them to get that solid foundation. And I know that my community put a lot into me.
Yeah.
I went to the local church. The local market knew me. And even now, the butchers who are 30 years later, they know my boys. They know when they grow up. And so there was something important for me in that decision. And so in terms of me running for office, it was very interesting. I had no idea that I would be in politics because it could get rough sometimes and I didn't want to hurt anyone. But so when I decided to run, it was a spiritual decision, and I ran and I went old school. I put up every banner myself.
Yeah.
I went through driving through the neighborhood with a bullhorn, telling people to vote for me, but it was my way of wanting to give back. And I think it goes back to even serving on the board at Buckley. I wanted to not only be an example of someone who was homegrown, who can come back and be an example for young people. And again, don't get me wrong, we can live wherever we want, but I'm always cautious when people say, you know, I got out. I ran out, because their baby's still living there.
Yeah.
And you want them to value where they are at that time. And so for me, it was my way to say, look, I went here, I attended here, and now I can serve here and ensure that the next generation will also have the opportunities, because, again, education can make a difference if systems allow for that.
Yeah. Can you just tell us a little bit about what your boys are doing now, Jaren and Jared?
Of course. And so my Jared is at Tuskegee University.
Yes.
He is a junior studying math and physics.
Ooh.
I guess the math gene jumped over there, but he can really do it, so it's okay. And I am proud to say he is a pilot.
I was about to say, isn't he going into aviation?
Yes, he is going into aviation. He is a pilot. He's been flying since he was 16. Compton has an airport.
Compton
Not a lot
has
of
an
people
airport,
know.
yes.
Hey, raise the roof, straight out of Compton. And so he is following in the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen. And so he is part of a Red Tail Scholarship, where, you know, as a single mom, flying is very expensive. There are only 2% African American pilots. Flight is about $250 an hour. At one point when he wanted to start flying, I was working like 2 jobs because I was paying out of pocket, and I probably have paid around $60,000 to get him started. And thankfully, when he got to Tuskegee, there's a Red Tail Scholarship where, in the honor of the Tuskegee Airmen, young people, they'll pay for their flight lessons and for them to become instructors, and then they pay it forward by teaching. So over the past 2 years, they have this whole new flock of young black pilots.
Wonderful.
And Jared is one of the senior instructors. And at their homecoming 2 weeks ago, they flew formation.
Wow.
And he's also part of the Puppy Paw Patrol. So they fly dogs who get stranded in natural disasters back to their little home. So he'll fly to Florida. Oh, yes. So I'm excited. Okay, so I won't get sappy. But
No,
so
get
he
sappy.
is,
That's
okay.
amazing.
So he is doing that, and he'll be pursuing his master's in engineering and then hopefully his PhD. But he at some point wants to fly commercial, and that's what we're going to support. And my Jaren, who actually is a car person, one was into cars and one was into planes. And just so happened both are expensive.
Yeah.
But he has always wanted to and will own his own car company. He's a photojournalist. He's taking courses at the local community college. He actually got accepted to a design school in Italy, and things got a little crazy politically.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So I kept him here. He'll say he kept himself here, but I didn't want to have to hurt anyone again. And so now he's reapplying to return next year and to continue on that path. But they're both very blessed. They do a lot in the community. I'm part of My Brother's Keeper and giving back to young people. And so for me, I love it because I saw my mother work hard. I saw her sacrifice. And she eventually went back to school.
Oh, she did?
She did.
What?
When I was 20, she graduated with her bachelor's degree. She was working full-time on the weekends. And I was sharing with some students not too long ago. I said, I didn't even realize I was first generation.
Yeah.
But she was so focused on providing that opportunity. Now, we went without some things, but what she felt was most important is where she put her focus. And that's the same thing for me. My boys knew, you may not get a whole lot of extraneous things. You will not go without your immediate needs, but this is a journey, and we're investing in things that will help you long term and help you to give back to others as well.
I mean, that's an amazing lesson.
Thank
it really
you.
is. And I haven't seen your boys apart. I mean, maybe once or twice, but how are they doing apart?
It was interesting when Jaren in high school, he lived a year in Italy. And so that's when I started Jared with his flight lessons.
Yeah.
But now they miss each other. They talk every night.
Okay.
We talk every night.
Yeah.
And I think they've actually gotten closer. They were super close, but they'll call each other and not call me. And I'll walk in and say, well, wait, are you talking to your brother? Well, wait a minute, I've not talked to him. So I'm loving that. And again, equally supporting each other with their pursuits. And so I'm just excited about that. What sacrifice was made. And then understanding that all parents want the same thing for their children. They want them to thrive. They want them to be happy. And I count it a privilege to educate young people. And I tell them, you know, when we walk in on the first day, I said, you expect something from this. This is your time, your talent, your treasure, and equally as rigorous as I am, because I tell them, you better come in here with my work. Will be the same thing when I tell them, go home and watch some movies today. Take care of yourself. Are you eating today? What's going on with you today? Because it's a very precarious stage in their lives. And I think each of us needs someone to say, I have high expectations of you, but it's through a lens of care and real consideration of who you are. And so my students, I hope, and hopefully that exemplifies that, is that I want for them to be their best selves. And I feel that it is my responsibility that they get everything that they come in here looking for, and even things they don't even know. That they stretch themselves and that they recognize that corrective lens. That they see themselves, because I teach a writing class often. So kids come in and they're like, oh, I can't write, I hate writing, I'll never get better. But we start talking about, let's put the assignment aside. So I have them do assignments, and it's not worrying about a grade. It's about building their sense of self and their confidence in the fact that your writing is going to follow your thinking. Let's work on your thinking. And so while we're working on their thinking around business, we're working on their thinking about them. So guess what? The A is not the issue. Grades will follow. And to be quite honest, there were some classes, a B was an A for me. I was like, thank God I got out of here. But the point is that how do you really understand that this is a journey, that this one class is not going to define who you are, but you feeling confident in your voice and being able to express that is important. And keeping yourself accountable, right? We all, and that's why I think it's so important. I share my transcript with my students. I share my story, because I think oftentimes adults show young people the end of the story, and then they feel uncertain about, how can I get to that point? Because they're frail still. They're going to make mistakes. But we are so often, unfortunately, more inclined to hide the bad stuff or the challenge. And so without that, how do people navigate and say, it's okay, and here is the positive outcome? And so I always try to provide some both academic lessons and some life lessons. And I tell them, my mama's hat is coming on, so just get ready for it, and we flow.
What I have 6 more questions for you, but I only have time for 2. Are you the only one in the room at USC? Are there others?
Well, it's very interesting. I've been there 20 years, and I'm a professor. I am one black female of maybe 5, and one black person of maybe a total of 10 out of 250. So I have been often the only one in a classroom, in a meeting, and I've taken on new responsibilities. We recently had our presidential search. We transitioned leadership, and I was very honored to sit on that. And other than the interim president, I was the only black person in the room, and over a 7-month period at a very precarious time. And the weight and the responsibility and the opportunity all intersecting is something that I'm still processing, to be quite honest. And I serve on the Dean's Cabinet, again, an honor, but I too am the only black person on that cabinet. And I'm in meetings where there are 23 people, and while I'm listening, I'm also charting, looking numerically at the data that out of 23 people, I'm the only black person in the room. And I have to begin to question, is it systemic? Is it intentional? Can I stay focused? What work do I have to do? Whose responsibility is it? And it does raise the question for me, why is there still an only anything in 2019, almost 2020, in the sense of where we have control?
Thank you. Second question before we go to the Dear Laura. Do you have words of advice for other women who were coming into the ranks of education, maybe following in your footsteps, who are also singletons in their department or in their school?
Yes, I will say, especially for mothers, that jump and pursue your desired passions. And for me, that corrective lens, I was concerned, what was I sacrificing for my kids? And I was really showing them about how important it is to value yourself and pursue your education. And so for other women, I would say, move all the excuses out of the way. It's never going to be the exact right time. It will never always be the exact right money. Your children will understand, because that time is going to pass either way, but you'll be closer to whatever desired goals you have. And so whether you enter in at the community college level, if it takes you 10 years, so what?
Right.
Guess what? You're still moving toward that goal. And so I would say, find whatever you so desire to do. Pursue that, and then go look for the next opportunity.
Yes, I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so here's the Dear Laura. Dear Laura, I never thought I'd be saying this, but I am a single mom for the second time. Being a single mom is the hardest and also the most empowering thing I've ever done. I miss my husband and shared life chores, but life made a quick turn and threw me off the bench. I wasn't prepared for this, but I'm grateful. After all, it's the tough stuff that reminds me what I'm made of. I feel that the only way to conquer this journey is to relate it to someone else's journey, and I want you to know that you are my inspiration. If you can go through this, then I can go through it.
I would recommend to be compassionate towards yourself. And to recognize that it is a difficult lot at times, but the joy, right? The joy that you have and the blessings of your children and their smiles that could lift you up and pick you up, even when you are feeling overwhelmed, right? So it's like, is it the laundry? Is it dinner? So when I'm running in the house, a lot of times, start your homework, get your shower. What am I going to cook? And I used to always be down on myself because I was like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. Do I start a full dinner? There are always going to be, trade-offs. And there can always be reasons to put those other lenses back on. And so I would say, have compassion for yourself, forgive yourself, and continue to find community with women who are single and not single, but just parents who are navigating the same space, because it's well worth the investment. So well worth it.
Well, and I remember you telling me, because you and I connected, did you connect before my divorce or right afterward? Do you remember? Right afterward. And you just lifted me up and told me how fortunate my boys were to have somebody that was so present for them, and then that was the most important thing I could be and do at that time, and none of the trappings really mattered, what I could give them, because I didn't know what resources I would have after all was said and done. And you just really beautifully explained to me that what I was doing was enough and was more than a lot of people had, but that's, if I just kept my focus there, and my boys are like, they're mushy little You know, they're up under me, and it's such an affectionate, loving relationship. So if that then became my focus, was just obviously, like you said earlier, you know, making sure they had all their physical needs met, but that was the most important thing, to be present for them and give them that. And if that's what this woman can do, then that is enough, and then that compassion can be there.
And that example is there for them too.
Yes.
It teaches them in a great way, and I know for my boys, it has been wonderful to see how they have responded to that. And again, a lot of times we hold ourselves too accountable in the sense of being judgmental.
Yeah.
And it's not time sometimes. You needed to be present. I needed to be present. I could have gone and done other things, but I needed to be there for my boys. And they are happy for it. I am happy for it, and we are all blessed.
Yes, we are. Do you have 2 books coming out next year?
Yes, I do. One is The Perpetual Surveillance of Black Men, and it's been looking at historically how black men in particular, but a lot of people who are othered, are surveilled, and basically under this sense of constant watch, either literally or figuratively, and how does it change your innate behavior? So going back to the classroom and what we were sharing with our babies, right? One young boy could be couched as precocious and just having fun, and then our boys may be couched as they're not listening. They need to, you know, have some sort of disciplinary. And over a period of time, I say it's like a hard drive. You cannot erase those memories or experiences. And so what does it take? So when my boys leave at night and I have to say, make sure your license is out of your wallet, or make sure your hands are, they can't just be. And so I think it's so imperative, right, that we recognize how those experiences manifest. But the book is also a resiliency piece. So we talk about what happens, but we get back to how do people cope, but more importantly, how do we interrupt or disrupt that? And then the other one is called Diapers and Dissertations.
Yes, I love that.
And it's, of course, as you can probably imagine, it's really about understanding that life will always intervene, but you still have to move forward towards your goals. And, you know, whether it's 12 hours in your office trying to get your dissertation done, hey, it's worth it. And guess what? It'll be something else the next time, but we move forward. So it's really just capturing women's stories.
You have a lot of credits, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but again, online, when you look up Sharoni, you will see there's a really beautiful piece by the LA Times where you're talking about the Obama legacy, and it has photographs of the Obamas and your family, and really just gorgeous. I don't even understand how something like that happens. And then it's my friend up there, which is so cool. But yeah, you are a thought leader, and you have all these organizations, right, that you have helped, and there's a whole list of them, and I'm going to try to make sure that do you have like a website or?
Well, yeah, the Strategist Company they can go to, and really a lot of the work that I do is for different community organizations. So the Center for Native American Youth at the Aspen Institute, and that was really an impetus, a program from when President Obama visited Alaska.
Right.
And he wanted to have other young people and the young suburban youth to just see things differently. And so in partnership with some organizations, the Children in Nature Network, as well as the Obama Foundation, and now the Center for Native American Youth, we brought together kids from different backgrounds, different communities. So the kids from Alaska, kids from Compton and Long Beach, and they did a 2-week adventure together. And the goal was to put them in the outdoors, for one, because of all of the well-being and mental health value, but also to say, how do we learn to value humanity? So the kids from Compton and Long Beach went to Alaska looking for igloos, right? Because they were listening, and the kids from Alaska came looking for shootouts,
right?
Because they had heard the narratives. But the important piece was they left as friends. They left as, a lot of times, brothers. I was talking about Jared being a pilot. One of the young boys from Alaska is now pursuing and flying because of that exchange that they had. And so you have to be in proximity of people to know them.
Yes, you do.
It's much easier for me to harm you to say something negatively about you if I'm not in proximity to you. And so many of the programs that I'm associated with is how do we teach the knowledge, the tools, the skills to disrupt, dismantle hate, bigotry, bias, but really to value the commonality and difference, and to say that we are so much stronger when we're together and when we learn about each other, because absent of that, we will continue to have these systems that intentionally reinforce these onlys, that don't allow young people to pursue their degrees or don't allow them to be precocious and interesting. Spirited.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Code.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it becomes imperative, though, that we find opportunities. And I think all of us can do that. And, you know, a lunch at the park with someone new, it's just as simple as that. And so those are the kind of programs, whether it be that or working with the Children's Defense Fund and working with community resource centers to provide resources for mothers who have experienced domestic violence. It's all about family and community. And I really want to say it goes back to my grandmother, because at some point my mother told me her last memory of her mother, and it makes me a little emotional because her mother had had a stroke. And her last memory was she went in to see her mom, and her mother was trying to fix her hair. She couldn't speak, but even on her sick bed, she was thinking about how her child looked. She didn't want her to look unkempt. And so hearing that and watching my mom and instilling that in me, I think that has been the greatest lesson and the legacy that I hope that I'm continuing and sharing with young people about just valuing one another.
Yeah. Well, the world is a better place with you in it, and I am so glad you're my friend.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're my friend.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for
doing this.
having me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're
I'm
beautiful.
so thankful. Thank you. You are also.
I think the first place I met you was at the Buckley, it was a dinner for all the board members. And I was nervous already. I hadn't worn a suit in years. But you were sitting with at the time, some of the most powerful people in Los Angeles. And I was just, and you were so comfortable. And I don't know, I'm just taken with the purpose with what you live.
Thank you so much. I think having that ability is obviously honoring the opportunity to be in a place to, you know, weigh in on things that are important, but it was more about not the people themselves or the power themselves, but about the fact that I was given opportunity to have a voice, and especially for those who could not be in that room.
Well, and I feel like you're so prepared for it. I think every time, like just sitting here, I feel like I need to go home and do some homework on my purpose in life, you know?
You got to catch me on a Saturday night, Scott.
No, you know, and I do. I actually, one of the things I like to do when I feel that way is envision someone like yourself driving in the car singing. What might you sing in the car if you were by yourself?
So a couple of things. One song is called "The Best of My Love." It's one of my favorites. You got the
There she goes.
best of my love, and I dedicate it to my kids, and I sing it real loud. And then I said, when I get married, you guys understand, I'm gonna have to sing this to my husband. And
Are you getting married?
at some point,
Okay,
I'm
okay.
praying.
Okay.
Look, I'm gonna follow this loving relationship right here, so
yeah.
I have to do that. But yeah, I love to sing the oldies, and I'm so shocked because my kids have playlists. They come with Frankie Beverly and everybody.
You start singing it?
Yeah,
I have some
because
Frankie Beverly, actually.
when I commuted, we commuted from Compton. It was an hour minimally each way, and they were 4 when we started commuting that way. So I would make a playlist. And it would be spirituals, and then it would be old school.
And they're sitting in the car with
And
you.
they're
like,
sitting in the car. And as they started getting older, I'm like, where you hear that song from? And so now we have what we call the Curtis playlist, because that's where they went to elementary. And we have the Buckley playlist. And it's so fun. I love music. I love sports, you know. So.
Well, that was another thing, raising 2 boys.
Yes.
Yeah. I have 2 girls, so... You know, I
Beautiful
grew up,
girls.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and then we blended our families, and and then coming from a predominantly white upbringing, but in a very racially diverse place in Virginia, knowing intuitively and deeply that there was something wrong with the world, and then years later getting a seat at the table in Laura's house has been really eye-opening. Like, to say you understand something is one thing, but to sit and watch it unfold. To, her mother comes from a time in history when, kids today I don't even think they hear stories about the way she was raised and what she was raised with. And, one of the things that I've really learned is to listen more. As a white male, as the as the predominant, race in the country, my initial response to indifferences and things that were wrong were very defensive, and I realized there was something wrong with that. Because I don't believe many of the things that are said, but I find that my just natural response to them was like to push away, and I've gotten better and better at that, to listen. The way you load everything is so intelligent and so logical, and it doesn't push away at all. It appeals to the intellect, which I think is such important language right now, in this time and what we're going through.
I think it's so important because, as I was sharing earlier, at the end of the day, I have to see the humanity in you, because if not, I can justify doing anything to you. And I think oftentimes it's fear that fuels, and because it's a lack of engagement, right? And so I do try to intentionally create an inclusive way to still call out issues of oppression or racism or any ism, but the outcome is that I still need to be in relationship.
With the very people that you're trying to appeal to, right?
And so if I want to be in community, if I say I value community, then I need to be in community. And it does not take away my ability to speak truth to power, but it also does not have to distance me or be divisive. Now, you can make a choice about whether or not you want to be open to that message, but I think more people than not, we'll find people on either end of the continuum will be more receptive, especially when you are in a human relationship. It's difficult not to love me. So I'm just saying.
I feel you. I think that, I think that the first thing that I always think of is that the color of our skin is what separates us. And then as I got older, I started to realize that really it was the culture that was attached to that. And then, like, what's wrong with culture? It's not knowing. You talked about traveling and how that changes people. And my daughter, who you gave a tour at USC when she was so in love with USC. She still is, but we couldn't afford to go there. But she landed at LMU, by the way.
Yes, which is a great school.
Great school. And she's looking at UCLA to transfer. But she spent a year in Bali, and it changed her forever. She took a gap year, and I was so nervous, because when I was a kid, gap year meant I was going to go fuck off for a while.
Yes, and not be able to do anything afterwards.
No, but hearing you talk reminds me of her journey. She learned how to love people for who they are. She got loved by a whole other culture of people. She decided how she wanted to take what she wanted to do and bring real purpose to it. Part of what she wants to do is trade schools, Bali schools, and build a school in Santa Cruz and have those guys go back and forth, which is exactly what you were talking about as far as educating people. And I travel quite a bit, and I love to just find myself as a human being in another culture instead of an American who doesn't understand how things are working and complaining and calling things that are familiar. I don't know why I just went off on that tangent. But
some kids can go throughout their entire life and never have that context.
Yeah.
You remember the story about my dad meeting Laura for the first time?
No.
Oh, we'll have to turn you on to that.
I think I have heard that.
You probably heard it. I think it's too long to tell now.
Yeah, but do you think that this conversation is something that is going to take generations of it's going to take my kids to teach their kids and have that change, or do you think we can expect a quicker resolve to this blending of the world?
You know what? I don't know if we have a set time frame. I think what we can look to is a heart frame.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we realize that it's not competition, because I think most times when people are vying for control and power, then they have to find a scapegoat, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have to demonize you.
Right.
I have to other you, because for me to stay in control, I have to have someone to control.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever there is equality, then if you are viewing it from this lens of competition, it will continue to be. And I will continue to make sense of why I dislike you. I will continue to tell myself, my children, my family, my community, narratives about why you're a threat, why you're not valuable, why you're a problem in school. So I think when we as human beings, on the one hand, understand that your humanity does not in any way threaten my humanity, and that in fact, me not allowing you to express your humanity is a loss for me.
Right.
And then when others are not at that place, that we collectively call that out and say, we're not trying to exclude you, but this is the way we're going to play on the playground, right? We want you to play with us. Come join our circle, but we're not going to have you hitting. We're not going to have you pushing. We're not going to have you excluding. And so I think it's a both and I have to remain hopeful, because I want my children not to get to points where I've been at times where it's like, is this all futile? Is this a hamster wheel? Why do you have to have a position to tell people to include others, to make them feel safe, to make them feel as if they belong? Why are there positions in education and in workplaces to instruct on that? And that's why I think, in business we talk about soft skills, hard skills, and I tell people all the time, it's nothing soft about interpersonal communication. It's nothing soft about thinking differently and thinking analytically, and respect and listening is foundational to human engagement, and we have to continue to develop that. And the more we do that, I think the quicker we'll get to it. Of course, with human beings, it's going to be conflict. Conflict is not the issue. It's how we navigate the conflict.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
love having you. Yeah. By the way, you're amazing you're so cute when you blush.
Yeah.
And when you blush, I wanted to ask you about the dating thing. But,
Oh, shoot. Well, I'll end on when I first met you, though, at the restaurant. And I was like, who is that? And Laura said, that's my Scotty.
Yeah.
And so she put the emphasis on my, and you both were just like glowing. And I was like, oh, my goodness, my friend, you are so happy. And I like him. And he's cute. So now all these years later,
Yes.
thank you both for inviting me today.
Yeah, thank you, Sharoni.
I'm so glad you came.
Yep.